Many who read A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin must have thought at some point, so when will the magic finally begin? This is fantasy after all, but the magic never really begins. All we get is Bran Stark going beyond the wall guided by a frightening companion, and Daenerys Targaryen flying off on her uncontrollable dragon. Meanwhile, our greedy gazes keep reaching toward mysterious Asshai at the edge of the shadow and the ruins of ancient Valyria. Alas, to this day, the author seems far more interested in intrigues and brutal reprisals. Still, a tiny drop of sorcery was added to this cocktail. Supposedly written by the Meisters of the Citadel, the history of House Targaryen entitled Fire and Blood was published in 2018. Brimming with inconsistencies, like any true work of medieval historians, this book became the basis of the series House of the Dragon. Even so, readers' expectations were only partially met. In the book, we find only half the story of the Dragon Kings of Westeros. And yet, let us delve into the history of the Targaryens, lords of mysterious Valyria, who prided themselves on the belief that dragon blood flowed in their veins. That the Targaryens originate from Valyria admits no doubt. As for the ancient and mighty republic itself, however, a great many rumors and whispers have accumulated. Nevertheless, it is believed that already about 5,000 years before Aegon's conquest, Valyria possessed incredible power. Its essence lay in dragons, which were supposedly tamed by shepherds living on an isolated peninsula of Essos. Their land of the long summer was separated from the rest of the continent by a chain of active volcanoes, the 14 Flames. According to this version, dragons were born in the infernal fire of these mountains and nested on their slopes. Another version claims that the shepherds were enslaved by powerful sorcerers from the Shadow, the mysterious land at whose edge the city of Asshai still stands, a haven of magi and strange gods. These very sorcerers are said to have brought the dragons from the Shadow. After all, how could ancient wild goatherds have tamed dragons on their own? With magicians, bloody rituals, and the like, it sounds far more convincing. In any case, the principal power of the Lords of Valyria was precisely the dragons, and the lords themselves sincerely believed that dragon blood flowed in their veins. It is quite possible that this belief had very solid grounds. The Valyrians quite literally terrorized Essos, driving out the Andals, the Rhoynar, and other peoples. After their defeat, the Andals poured into Westeros, and the remnants of the Rhoynar were fortunate enough to reach Dorne, while the Giscari Empire was destroyed completely. In short, these Valyrians were a decidedly warlike lot. They did not forget to quarrel among themselves either. The struggle for power is a complicated thing. In the end, Valyria brought the doom upon itself. In principle, what happens when a volcano, or rather 14 at once, meets the raging sea? Correct, a catastrophe of cosmic scale. Yet, people in Essos and Westeros firmly believed that the cataclysm fell upon the heads of impious magi through their own fault. Well then, let us adhere to that version as well. It must be said that the Valyrian appetites extended beyond Essos alone. Slowly but surely, the dreadful Republic was edging toward Westeros as well. The islands of Blackwater Bay, Dragonstone, Driftmark, and Claw Isle belonged to the Valyrians already 300 years before the fall of their state. In the 114th year before Aegon's quest, Aenar Targaryen sold all his property in Valyria. Together with his children and household, his army, slaves, dragons, and his allies, the Velaryons and the Celtigars, he moved to Blackwater Bay. The new home of the Dragon Lords became Dragonstone, an island with an active volcano. Naturally so, for dragons find such a place most convenient. Not being dragon lords themselves, but excellent seafarers, the Velaryons settled on Driftmark, while the Celtigars took Claw Isle. Thus, the Targaryens and their allies practically sealed off the entire bay with their power. All that remained was to control maritime trade and grow rich. And 12 years later, Valyria was struck by the doom. It is sometimes said that the Targaryens fled the Republic to escape more powerful houses. In truth, this is not entirely accurate. Yes, the Targaryens were not among the strongest Dragon Lord families, but they lacked no martial spirit. The reason was that Aenar's daughter, Daenerys, was a dreamer. She foresaw the approaching destruction in a vision, and her father believed her without hesitation. Such behavior was well-founded among Dragon Lords. For many centuries they had practiced close-kin marriages, striving to preserve the purity of their blood. The Valyrians strictly observed this tradition because of the peculiar magical bond with dragons. And, to be honest, while dragons still lived, the Targaryen line produced neither deformities nor outright madmen, unhinged from birth. Yes, the Targaryens fled, but not from people. And solely thanks to the gift of Daenerys the Dreamer, they remained the only dynasty of dragon lords in the world. Their dragons became all that was left of the breed of beasts from mighty Valyria. All the others perished in the fire of the Doom. Aenar Targaryen's foresight did more than save his house. Possession of dragons made his family the most powerful in the world. However, the noble Valyrians did not immediately turn their gaze toward Westeros. For the Targaryens to feel cramped on Dragonstone and for Blackwater Bay to begin to seem like a mere puddle, an entire century had to pass. And so it did. When it was over, the next Lord of Dragonstone decided that being merely a lord was no longer enough. Aegon Targaryen, whom we know as Aegon the Conqueror, did not immediately turn his gaze toward Westeros. At first, like several generations of his forebears, he was far more interested in affairs of the East. Aegon possessed the last dragon who had seen native Valyria with his own eyes, the immense Balerion, the Black Dread. He also had two sisters, the elder Visenya and the younger Rhaenys. Their dragons, Vhagar and Meraxes, were smaller than Balerion and had hatched early here, in the warm caves of Dragonstone. We do remember that Valyrian dragon lords married only close kin, do we not? By tradition, Aegon was supposed to take the elder sister as his wife. However, it happened that he loved the younger. To preserve tradition while offending neither himself nor his beloved, Aegon married both sisters at once, thereby laying the foundation for the first internal conflict of the House of the Dragon. But that lay far ahead. And what of Westeros? Did these three dragon riders simply swoop in and attack? For some reason, this opinion is widespread. Alas, here again, we are dealing with idle speculation. At that time, Westeros was a textbook example of a feudal fragmentation, divided into 7 independent kingdoms. The continent was mired in wars. If kings were not fighting one another, they were warring with their own lords, who believed they had greater rights to the crown, and only the wall in the north, unshakable as polar ice, towered above human strife. Before venturing into Westeros with war, Aegon Targaryen and his sister Visenya visited it as guests. In their youth, they were in Old Town, visited the Citadel, flew to the Arbor to see Lord Redwyne, and possibly visited Lannisport. When Aegon became the ruler of Dragonstone, he was troubled by the Stormlands and their king, Argilac Durrandon. The warlike Lord of Storm's End was dividing territories with Harren, the Black Horay, king of the Iron Islands. Harren had a fierce temper and great strength. It was then that the aging Argilac Durrandon made a mistake that cost all the kingdoms of Westeros their independence. Wishing to draw the Dragon Lord to his side, the naive Argilac offered Aegon his daughter's hand in marriage. As dowry, he proposed lands long lost by the Storm Kings and now under the rule of Harren the Black. Whether Argilac was foolish or blind is hard to say. With Dragonstone so close at hand, he ought to have known more about the customs of its owners, especially about how scrupulously the famed purity of blood was observed among those from Valyria. Aegon, by contrast, was neither a fool nor blind, and so he sent a counter-proposal. Argilac's daughter would go to his bastard brother, Orys Baratheon. The dowry would indeed be lands, but not those long ago lost to the Ironborn. And what did Durrandon do in response? He cut off the messenger's hand and sent it back to the Targaryen. Is it any wonder that this Durrandon became the last? Dragon Lords were not accustomed to tolerating such insults. The answer to Durrandon's recklessness was an ultimatum to all the kings and lords of Westeros. Aegon Targaryen informed them that from now on, there would only be one king in Westeros, and any who refused to submit would be destroyed. This method of declaring war lacked elegance. But who needs courtesies when one has a dragon? And Aegon had 3 war dragons. Without wasting time, the Targaryens gathered a not particularly large host of their bannermen and supporters and landed at the mouth of the Blackwater. The land was disputed and thus suffered from the absence of authority. The River Kings had fallen under the onslaught of the Ironborn, and the River Lords were in no hurry to recognize Harren the Black as their suzerain. Some neighboring castles were taken without a fight. Certain Stormland lords had long grown closer to Dragonstone and willingly turned away from Storm's End. Rosby surrendered to Rhaenys, and at Stokeworth, Visenya needed only to frighten the defenders slightly with Vhagar. The lords of Maidenpool and the Blue Fork chose to fight. It was unpleasant, but not fatal. They marched with their armies against the invaders, but Orys Baratheon struck them on the road with the Targaryen host, and Aegon personally supported him from the air on Valyrian. The heirs of the fallen lords surrendered and swore fealty to the victors, and the Targaryens gained a major seaport, the Blue Fork. And of course, they replenished their army as well. In the end, Aegon captured about a dozen castles neighboring the mouth of the Blackwater and entrenched himself on the seized land. There, he crowned himself, so to speak, in advance. He distributed court offices to his loyal supporters and established the position of Hand. The first Hand was Orys Baratheon, friend and bastard brother of the king. However, the circlet placed upon the head of Visenya's brother-husband still had to be secured by conquest. The kings of Westeros were in no hurry to submit to the demands of the overseas lord. They had strong armies, and they knew almost nothing of the combat qualities of dragons. Most concluded that the matter must be settled by force, and only a few proposed alliances with the Targaryens against their ancient enemies. The terms of such cooperation could not have satisfied even a less ambitious lord, let alone Aegon the Conqueror. The Targaryen divided his forces into 3 parts. Orys Baratheon marched on Storm's End, accompanied by Queen Rhaenys on Meraxes. Daemon Velaryon went by sea to Gulltown and the Vale, with Queen Visenya on Vhagar providing fiery support. Aegon himself, on Balerion, and with the ground host, went straight to Harrenhal, the new, supposedly impregnable castle of Harren the Black. It must be said that the kings of Westeros offered desperate resistance. Had the Targaryens lacked dragons, they would never have won. Even while continuing their internal wars, the local kings were still very powerful. Harren the Black, however, was undone by pride and greed. For 3 generations, the Ironborn had ruled the Riverlands, yet they earned neither the love of the people nor the respect of the lords. At the first opportunity, the Tullys of Riverrun, followed by other local rulers, defected to Aegon's side. Harren was left without support and shut himself up in his new fortress. Yes, for ordinary armies this monstrous castle was an insurmountable obstacle, but not for Balerion the Black Dread. And yet, it cannot be said that Aegon failed to offer him a peaceful settlement. He was willing to swear fealty to the Targaryens and retain his power over the Iron Islands, securing it forever for his house. But no, Harren the Black refused to bow his head and replied to Aegon that stone does not burn. He even nurtured the hope of bringing down a dragon, sincerely believing it possible. Balerion, black as the night itself, descended upon the castle under cover of darkness and drowned it in fire. Of course, stone does not burn, but even stone began to melt in the hell the dragon unleashed. And what can be said of men? By morning, House Horay had vanished from the face of Westeros. The title of Lord of the Trident was granted to Edmund Tully, and all other river lords swore fealty to the Targaryen and recognized Tully as their suzerain. It is a pity that all of Westeros could not be conquered in this manner. The king of the Stormlands, Argilac, raised a great host, and the presence of Queen Rhaenys' dragon failed to frighten his bannermen. The battle was hard and bloody, and foul weather prevented the dragon from attacking from the air. Even so, Meraxes wrought plenty of havoc on the ground. King Argilac did not yield. Having lost his horse, he continued to fight on foot, dealing tangible damage to his enemies. The outcome of the battle had to be decided by single combat. Orys Baratheon and Argilac Durrandon met one-on-one. Aegon's hand managed to fulfill the old king's dream. The Lord of the Stormlands fell in battle. Having lost their suzerain, the army broke and fled. Could Storm's End have suffered the fate of Harrenhal? Unlikely. Queen Rhaenys was not warlike, unlike her elder sister and brother. Orys Baratheon, for his part, was more interested in lands and titles than in senseless devastation. As a result, he took Argella Durrandon as his wife and became Lord of Storm's End, on entirely lawful grounds. Those two victories greatly improved the Conqueror's position, yet there were still 4 kings left in Westeros. Of course, Torrent Stark of Winterfell would take an eternity to march south, and the King of the Vale was but a small child, for whom Lady Arryn ruled, choosing to hide within her castle. The Gardeners of Highgarden and the Lannisters of the Rock posed the greatest threat. These kings were often allies and did not hesitate to unite now as well. It was they who learned firsthand what coordinated action by 3 war dragons meant. For both queens flew to aid their husband. Despite a clear numerical advantage, the combined host of Gardeners and Lannisters suffered a crushing defeat. The cunning Lannister fled the battlefield in time, then surrendered and bent the knee before Aegon. As a reward, in accordance with the Dragon Lord's promise, he retained his lands, received the title of Lord of Casterly Rock, and was appointed Warden of the West. In contrast, all the Gardeners burned alive like Harren the Black. Highgarden itself surrendered to the Targaryens without a fight. The castle's steward, Lord Tyrell, presented the conquerors with the keys and received Highgarden, all its lands, and the title of Warden of the South. In theory, the next steps would have been the Arbor, Old Town, and Dorne, but Aegon's plans were interrupted by the Northmen. King Torrent Stark reached the Riverlands with a very sizable army. Those who praise the foresight of the North are entirely correct. Having assessed the balance of forces, Torrent Stark decided not to fight at all. Yes, he became known as the King Who Knelt, but he saved the lives of his northern warriors. It mattered little that he was now no longer a king but merely Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Since ancient times, the harsh lands by the Wall had been far removed from southern quarrels, and just as far removed they would remain from capitals. Thereafter, Aegon may have made a mistake. He once again divided his family's strength. Setting out for Old Town, the Dragon King sent the warlike Queen Visenya to the Vale and Queen Rhaenys to Sunspear. The Vale greeted the Queen with fortified garrisons, but Vhagar, though no bird, easily flew over them all and landed directly in the Eyrie. While the regent, Queen Shara Arryn, gathered guards and descended into the courtyard, Queen Visenya had already enchanted the young king. Ronal Arryn quite literally exchanged his crown for a brief flight upon a dragon. He was, after all, the only king in Westeros to achieve such a thing. Visenya, too, was a woman, though the clash of arms attracted her far more than balls and music. So why did Aegon err? The gentle and romantic Queen Rhaenys went to Dorne. This defiant land would bring much sorrow to the kings of Westeros, whether Targaryen or otherwise. However, the first visit of the Dragon King's beloved wife ended peacefully, though in complete failure. All the men had vanished. In every Dornish city Rhaenys visited, children and old men came out to meet her instead of warriors. Even in Sunspear, she was awaited by an old woman, Maria Martell. This lady, in her 80 years, proved a tough nut to crack. The negotiations led nowhere. Princess Martell refused to submit, and Rhaenys was not prepared to wage war on children and the elderly. That the ruler of Dorne was a cunning old toad was known throughout Westeros. Limiting herself at first to threats, Rhaenys withdrew. Meanwhile, King Aegon was awaited in Old Town. The lands of Lord Hightower had long housed the Citadel, the center of scholarly life in Westeros. Here, too, stood the heart of the faith, the Starry Sept, where the High Septon himself conducted services. It was he who persuaded the mighty lord to surrender the city to the Conqueror. Thus, the conquest of Westeros formally came to an end. In the Starry Sept, Aegon's official coronation took place. However, the Dragon King did not wish to remain in Old Town or make it his capital. At the mouth of the Blackwater, where the Targaryens' first meager forces had landed, a new capital was slowly rising, King's Landing. From the battle-won, melted, and twisted swords of his enemies, Aegon forged the Iron Throne in Balerions' flames. According to legend, it possesses its own magical power and will not allow the unworthy to sit upon it. How much of this is true and how much mysticism remains unclear to this day. Thus began the reign of the first Targaryen in Westeros. Aegon the Conqueror ruled for 37 years. From the day he was anointed king in the Starry Sept, the beginning of his reign became the first year of a new system of reckoning time. In fact, this period may be called peaceful, for in feudal medieval society, wars were frequent and customary. No matter how strong a king may be, there will always be lords who wish either to replace him on the throne or simply to break away. The Dragon King was no exception. First of all, he had to subdue the Three Sisters and the Iron Islands. Here, no great difficulties arose. On the Sisters, the ruling dynasty even retained its title. The Iron Islands, having lost the firm hand of Harren the Black Whore, descended into chaos. House Whore was destroyed by Balerion the Black Dread in just a few breaths, and lawlessness reigned on the Iron Islands. After a year of internal strife, Aegon finally intervened and put an end to the feuds. The Iron Islands were granted to House Greyjoy, and the Ironborn themselves, by the king's command, chose it. Their mainland holdings were lost forever, but they managed to retain their own islands. Matters were far more complicated with Dorne. The defiant descendants of the Rhoynar stubbornly refused to recognize the authority of the Valyrian dragon lords, which was understandable enough. The First Dornish War lasted from the 4th to the 13th year after the conquest and ended with Dorne lying in smoking ruins. In the 10th year, at Hellholt, Aegon lost his beloved queen Rhaenys and the magnificent war dragon Meraxes. Peace was concluded only after the death of Meria Martell, when her son somehow managed to threaten the Targaryen king with something. Unfortunately, history has not preserved what exactly it was. The subsequent 24 years of Aegon Targaryen's reign were devoted to strengthening peace within the realm. In order to pacify the Seven Kingdoms, exhausted by wars, the Conqueror and his sister wives expanded even greater effort than their grandson Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, would later do. To minimize internal conflicts, the Targaryens actively encouraged marriages between ruling lords, for half a year at a time while Rhaenys was still alive. Aegon and one of his sisters devoted themselves to traveling throughout the realm. Later, the king continued this tradition, but visited his domains alone under the protection of the King's Guard. The famous White Knights, the King's Guard, also appeared under the first Targaryen. A king, after all, requires protection, for he cannot very well sleep in a dragon's lair. Although the laurels of inventing this instrument of power belonged to Queen Visenya, who succeeded in convincing her husband of the necessity of personal warriors loyal to him alone. Aegon I Targaryen proved himself a strong king and a wise ruler. Of the 37 years of his reign, 24 were devoted to establishing peace and strengthening the realm. But as often happens, if the previous king is wise and beloved by the people, nature seems to take a break on his children. The two sons of Aegon the Conqueror appeared to have divided his character between them. The elder, Aenys, the son of Queen Rhaenys, was born weak. Despite every effort, he never became a great warrior. With no sisters available, he was married to a Valyrian woman, Lady Alyssa Velaryon. That house had long boasted kinship with the House of the Dragon, and the blood of the dragon suffers no admixture. As heir to the throne, the king kept him close and took him on regular journeys throughout the realm. The younger Maegor, son of Queen Visenya, seemed to have been born a warrior. Alas, the boy was cruel to animals and people alike, and utterly merciless. Queen Visenya wished to marry him to the king's granddaughter Rhaena, but the faith opposed this match. In Westeros, close kin marriages were frowned upon, and Maegor had to take Lady Cerys Hightower, niece of the High Septon, as his wife. Who knows? Perhaps the Valyrian saying was right. In any case, no matter how he tried, Maegor could not sire a son. His elder brother, however, succeeded, and a son named Aegon was born to Aenys. The question of succession was now settled definitively and irrevocably, which displeased both Maegor and Queen Visenya. In total, the heir to the throne had 5 children. After Rhaena and Aegon, Viserys, Jaehaerys, and Alysanne were born. The eldest, Rhaena, invented the tradition of placing a dragon egg in the cradle of a newborn Targaryen. All in all, Prince Aenys at first had a rather happy family. Maegor, meanwhile, covered himself in martial glory. Even without his own dragon, he was a formidable opponent. As knights at tournaments, pirates on the stepstones, and brigands within the realm learned firsthand. The final years of Aegon the Conqueror were devoted to putting King's Landing and Dragonstone in order, and he largely withdrew from affairs of state. It was on Dragonstone that he died, in the 37th year after the conquest. The throne passed to Aenys. Aenys proved too soft and indecisive for the throne. Uprisings in the Vale, on the Iron Islands, and the Vulture King of Dorne threatened to inflict serious harm upon the realm. While the king hesitated, his younger brother finally chose a dragon. It was none other than Balerion the Black Dread. Upon him, Maegor rode forth to suppress the rebellions. Perhaps the king should have reflected on Maegor's behavior. The father's dragon, the father's sword. Was his brother also planning to seize the father's throne? King Aenys clearly believed in the best, and thus failed to notice the alarming signs until his brother, against the will of the faith, took a second wife. The Sept expressed open displeasure, and it proved impossible to appease it by exiling the blasphemous brother. But if Aenys had little power over the actions of his brother in hand, the next fatal mistake he committed himself. Following the ancient tradition of the Valyrian lords, the king gave his daughter Rhaena in marriage to her younger brother Aegon. Neither the people nor the servants of the faith understood how the bond between the Targaryen kings and their dragons truly worked. To be honest, the kings themselves likely did not understand it either. But Aenys went against the will of the church, and for the Septons it was no great task to turn the people against the king. After all, the noble Valyrian lords were absolute outsiders in Westeros. Queen Visenya repeatedly urged her nephew to settle the matter by force, but Aenys did not heed her. He should have. The entire realm rose against the unlawful incestuous marriage. The king himself, instead of teaching the Septons with dragonfire, hid on Dragonstone with his wife and younger children. And this was after only 4 years of peaceful rule. The heir to the throne, together with his church-disapproved wife, found himself besieged in Crakehall. And King Aenys, having undone the peace created by his father, faded and died at the beginning of the 42nd year after the conquest. At this point, Queen Visenya did not hesitate. Soon, Balerion the Black Dread landed on Dragonstone. Visenya crowned the returned Maegor, come back from across the narrow sea with the father's crown of Valyrian steel. Perhaps it was a sign. In any case, Maegor did not delay. He mounted his dragon and flew to the mainland. First, King's Landing, seized by the sons of the warrior, had to be reclaimed. Maegor prevailed in the trial of 7, but suffered a serious wound. Meanwhile, fanatical adherents of the faith, the poor fellas, were moving toward the capital in great numbers. The outcome of an honorable duel concerned them little. As is known, the strongest enemy of any suzerain is a crowd that he has carelessly turned against himself. King Maegor's condition worried his mother. He did not regain consciousness. Then, Queen Alice arrived from across the narrow sea. Maegor's second wife brought with her his favorite, Tiana of the Tower, a bastard daughter of a Pentoshi magister, a courtesan, and a sorceress. Through her ministrations, the king awoke the very next day. King Maegor Targaryen fought the Orders of the Faith throughout his entire reign, even though fully half of the insults to Westerosi piety had been inflicted by his hapless brother. The usurper had no chance of reconciliation with the church. He decided to take a third wife as well, Tiana of Pentos herself. This deed did not earn him the love of his own lords, but Maegor was swift in punishment, and they openly feared him. He solved difficult questions with the help of Valyrian, and simpler ones with the sword, never postponing the separation of rebellious heads from their bodies. For a time, however, he devoted himself to the construction of the royal castle. During this period, the churchmen managed to gather some strength, and in the west, Aegon the Uncrowned raised his head. Yet, these troubles failed to topple Maegor. Queen Visenya and Vhagar led the assault on Old Town and drowned the refuge of piety in blood and flame. The king himself soon joined his mother. After the strange death of the High Septon, resistance by the faith began to fade, and Maegor turned his gaze upon his defiant nephew. We will not describe the epic battles here. George Martin has done that far better than we ever could. Suffice it to say that Westeros witnessed its first dance of the dragons long before the quarrel between the children of King Viserys I. In the skies above the battlefield, Maegor on Balerion faced Aegon on the young Quicksilver. The size and combat experience of the Elder Dragon determined the victor. Aegon, the Uncrowned, perished without ever touching the Iron Throne. His young dragon died as well. The usurper king lacked the nobility and foresight of his father, and the slaughter on the battlefield was followed by half a year of trials and executions. The 44th year after the conquest was marked by the death of Queen Visenya. The only person capable of restraining the madness of her son passed from this world. Did Maegor grieve? Unknown. He was occupied with his matrimonial troubles. The desire to acquire an heir outweighed all other needs of the cruel king. Yet, this Targaryen seemed utterly incapable of creation. Even in his pursuit of a longed-for son, Maegor managed only to spill seas of blood. Cunningly framed by Queen Tiana, Queen Alice was put to death after a failed pregnancy. Together with her, the enraged king destroyed her entire house, and the castle of Harrenhal finally acquired its reputation as cursed. In the turmoil, Queen Alyssa managed to flee with the younger children of Aegon the Uncrowned, Jaehaerys and Alysanne. From the chambers on Dragonstone, they carried off Queen Visenya's Valyrian sword, Dark Sister. This escape cost the life of the eldest surviving son, Viserys. He was tortured to death in an attempt to learn where his mother had gone. The builders of the Red Keep were no luckier. Once the work was completed, King Maegor the Cruel held a feast for them and then ordered them all slain. Queen Cerys also died a strange death. It appeared accidental, yet no one believed it. Thereafter, King Maegor, while fighting half the realm, spat not only in the face of the faith, but of all humanity. He married 3 women at once, one of them his niece, Rhaena. Yet all the king's efforts came to nothing. Another wife gave birth to a dead, malformed child and died herself. It was then, apparently, that the king remembered Queen Tiana's reputation as a sorceress. Fearing torture, the Tiroshi woman confessed that she had poisoned the fruit in the womb of more than one mother. Naturally, Maegor killed the witch with his own hands, yet no executions could grant him the heir he desired. Meanwhile, the king himself rapidly lost his last supporters. Nearly the entire realm believed him cursed. Rhaegar Baratheon of Storm's End proclaimed Prince Jaehaerys the lawful king. Along with many lords, Queen Rhaena immediately joined him, bringing her dragon and the ancestral sword stolen from her husband. But a new war for the throne between kin did not occur. The Iron Throne itself took vengeance on the impious ruler for his crimes. King Maegor the Cruel was found dead in the throne room, bled dry and pierced by his own symbol of power. This happened in the 48th year after the conquest. Prince Jaehaerys received the Iron Throne a year before reaching adulthood. The few remaining claimants, the Queen Rhaena and her 2 daughters by Aegon the Uncrowned, had little desire to rule the Seven Kingdoms. The girls were only 6 years old, and their mother so fiercely hated King's Landing that she withdrew not even to Dragonstone. Her refuge, for many years, became Fair Isle. Another weighty argument in Jaehaerys' favor was his sex. After all, the Westerosi kingdoms are not Dorne. A woman on the throne quite logically aroused doubts among the subjects. Thus, the Iron Throne was taken by the underage son of Aenys I and Alyssa Velaryon. His mother served as regent, and Rhaegar Baratheon as Hand, who evidently expected to rule the realm himself, but it was not to be. Jaehaerys, unlike his father, proved a strong king and a wise ruler. History remembers him as the Conciliator. He ruled for 55 years and devoted his reign to uniting what his glorious grandfather had conquered. Of course, it did not pass entirely without wars. Unlike his father, Jaehaerys reacted to dangers in time and appropriately. Here, it is worth noting that peace in a realm is sometimes achieved through wars and hardships, but not by them alone. Having carried out his just judgment upon the accomplices of Maegor the Cruel, Jaehaerys faced a new calamity. His anointing by the High Septon was necessary, yet Old Town was besieged by hordes of the poor fellows under the leadership of Septon Moon. Across the realm, the Band Order of the Swords also raised its head, composed of knights and lords. The consequences of his predecessor's wars with the faith and its zealous adherents promised nothing good for the young king. However, it was here that the hand of fate, not yet turned away from the Targaryens, made itself felt. While the royal councillors debated what to do about the pauper's host at Old Town, Septon Moon was killed by his next disposable concubine. After the leader's death, his host simply fell apart, and the path to anointing was opened. At the end of the 48th year after the conquest, Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen became King Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator. Although, wait, that last epithet still had to be earned. Jaehaerys resolved the problem of the militant champions of the faith, and in passing even substituted his twin nieces. Of course, no one spoke of this aloud, but of Queen Rhaena's 2 daughters, the one now called the Elder Aeria was the one who could in any way pass for an heir. Understandably so, for the king was not yet married. The following year, the 49th after the conquest, is commonly called the Year of 3 Weddings. No, we will not analyze the entire reign of the Conciliator year by year. Simply note that these 3 weddings were the next 3 stones laid in the foundation of the Targaryens' eventual fall. Queen Rhaena quietly married Andro Farman of Fair Isle. The young man was not even an heir to a lord, and rumors were already circulating that Queen Rhaena preferred female companions to men. This marriage was not exactly concealed, but neither was it displayed, which greatly distressed Queen Mother Alyssa. Nevertheless, no one any longer expected possible heirs from this line, and the king blessed his sister, for he himself believed in love. The marriage of his mother did not please the king, but he did not oppose it. Perhaps in vain, but after a fight one does not wave fists. Rhaegar Baratheon married Alyssa Targaryen. Perhaps he even hoped to become king, who knows? At the very least, he had no intention of releasing power from his hands. The wedding of the regent queen and the hand was dubbed the Golden by the people. Grand celebrations and a nightly tourney were held in King's Landing, but not all the entertainments were idle. While the mother prepared for the wedding and Lord Rhaegar indulged in revels with other lords, King Jaehaerys and his beloved younger sister Alysanne were winning the love of the subjects. The tourney itself was needed to choose the missing knights for the king's guard. The golden wedding cost the treasury fabulous sums, yet the greatest benefit was nonetheless reaped by Jaehaerys and his sister. Unfortunately for the king, the adults did not long revel in festivities. Very soon they remembered the question of succession. Marrying the king to a bride acceptable to all was no easy task, and the royal council set about it in earnest. Naturally, neither Jaehaerys nor his sister Alysanne were invited to these discussions. all could see that the relationship between brother and sister had long gone beyond simple familial affection. And though in Valyrian houses such a marriage was the obvious solution, Queen Alyssa feared the fate of her elder children, and her husband did not wish to relinquish power. Fortunately for the loving hearts, Princess Alysanne learned of the counselors' plans first, and immediately informed her brother. Sending their King's Guard by sea, Jaehaerys and his sister mounted their dragons and flew to Dragonstone. There, an early Septon quietly joined them in marriage with the bare minimum of witnesses. But it is not enough merely to wed. One must also defend the decision, which threatened Westeros with a new war. Jaehaerys and Alysanne possessed the firmness and wisdom to stand their ground. Until the king came of age, the pair remained on Dragonstone, while Lord Rhaegar and the Queen Mother ruled the realm in their name. Strangely enough, the Royal Council labored to keep the king's marriage a strict secret. This, of course, did not mean that Alyssa and her husband did not try to separate the young couple through intrigues. However, here the scythe met the stone. All their efforts backfired, and Lord Rhaegar Baratheon lost the office of Hand. In his attempts to retain power, he lost more and more of it. The Regent Queen, after failing with the children and quarreling with her husband, simply appointed Daemon Velaryon as Hand and withdrew entirely from affairs. A perfect case of dig a pit for another. At the end of the 50th year after the conquest, the king reached adulthood and no longer needed a regent. However, intriguers helped spread rumors about his marriage, and the realm as a whole was uneasy. Yet the king did not waste time on Dragonstone. He and his sister-wife studied diligently, preparing to take up an unruly country. And the country waited. What kind of king would the son of the weak Aenys prove to be? However confident, the young Targaryen was in his rightness. He flew to King's Landing alone, but he came on a dragon to remind his subjects why they should listen to him. Not idle revelry, but the strengthening of the realm occupied the young king. He replaced most of the council, dealt with the prisoners of the Red Keep, reconciled with his stepfather Rhaegar Baratheon, and held a second wedding with his sister Alysanne. One might have expected another war to flare up in the realm, but no, people were wary, and the faith wisely kept silent. The sovereign himself launched a kind of propaganda of his own, convincing his subjects of the exceptional nature of the Valyrian dragon lords. The faith of the Seven had been brought to Westeros by the Andals, driven from their homeland by the Valyrians. The Targaryen family, meanwhile, were the only living heirs of the ancient republic and differed from the Westerosi in all things. Perhaps this effort was not in vain either. The realm accepted its queen. The elder sister Rhaena could have become a greater problem, but she did not. She merely insisted that her brother grant her Dragonstone. In addition, she bargained for her daughter Aerea, the heir to the throne. But Queen Alysanne soon conceived, and this ceased to matter so much. Of course, Jaehaerys' reign was not entirely peaceful. Did you expect it to be? He did not either. During the reign of the Conciliator, 2 Dornish wars took place, neither of which brought the desired result. Dorne remained a conditionally 7th kingdom. The proud descendants of the Rhoynar did not bow their heads. In truth, had a Valyrian dynasty not sat the throne, they would not have submitted to the kings of Westeros anyway. Jaehaerys, of course, became famous among the people for quite different deeds. Under his guidance began the long and costly transformation of King's Landing from a filthy port into a true capital. The king also took pains to put the roads in order. Who could have known that his descendants would later find it easier to march armies along these very roads into fratricidal wars? King Jaehaerys regularly set out on long journeys throughout the realm. Most often he was accompanied by Queen Alysanne, called the Good by the people. This tradition had been established by Aegon the Conqueror himself. True, under the reign of his grandson, the ceremonial underwent some changes, but in return, the honor of receiving the king was granted not only to the rulers of the former 6 kingdoms, but also to lesser lords. This, of course, added supporters to the sovereign. A long peace settled over the lands of Westeros. But peace is peace, and misfortunes and diseases spare neither great nor small houses. An epidemic of the shivers, coming from across the narrow sea, claimed many lives. Among the victims were important courtiers and the king's eldest daughter, Daenerys. For the ruling couple, this was a true blow, for the girl had been the joy of her parents. The shivers somewhat undermined the doctrine of exceptionalism of the royal family. It had been believed that no illness could threaten the blood of the dragon. However, idle rumors spread that the terrible epidemic had not come without cause. Shortly before it, the untamable Aerea, daughter of Rhaena and Aegon Targaryen and former heir to the throne, mounted Balerion the Black Dread and flew off into the unknown. The search for the princess yielded nothing. When nearly 2 years later Balerion returned to the Red Keep, his rider lost consciousness and died without ever awakening. The Meisters then concluded that the willful old dragon had carried his young rider to native Valyria. Rather, to what remained of it. Back they brought a terrible ancient curse, from which Aerea perished. The ghastly details of her death were, of course, concealed, but the scars and the fresh, smoking wound on the dragon's body could not be hidden. The marriage for love that bound king and queen bore much fruit. Many of them, however, were bitter, such as the unrestrained princesses Viserys and Saera. The first died in a crash during mad races through the Night City. The second brought shame upon the family, losing her innocence early and later becoming a courtesan in Lys. The fate of the dead and departed children of Jaehaerys and Alysanne seemed to society far preferable. In the 92nd year after the conquest, the heir to the throne, Prince Aemon Targaryen, was killed in battle. To the grief of loss was added another sorrow. With his wife, Jocelyn Baratheon, he left only a daughter, Rhaenys Targaryen, wife of the famed sea snake Corlys Velaryon. By the time of her father's death, seemed to have conceived, yet another girl was born. A boy came into the world a year later, in the 94th. Once again, problems of succession loomed on the horizon. Prince Viserys, son of the second heir of Jaehaerys and Alysanne Baelon, had, purely in theory, no rights to the throne. It is unknown whether he desired the Iron Throne, but on the day he came of age, he entered the dragon's lair and mounted Balerion. The old dragon unwillingly rose into the air, but managed only to circle King's Landing 3 times. A year later, he was gone, and Viserys... But let us not rush ahead. By the 100th year after the conquest, almost none of the old companions remained near Jaehaerys, those with whom he had labored for many years for the good of the realm. In the 99th year, Crown Prince Baelon, the heir to the throne, became Hand of the King. In the 100th, Queen Alysanne died, and only a year later, yet another official heir followed. A long life and a difficult reign undermined the king's health. Some said his mind as well. But whether that was so is not for us to judge. In any case, fearing turmoil in the realm, Jaehaerys, on the advice of his younger son Vaegon, committed one of his fateful mistakes. By that time, Vaegon Targaryen had already become an Archmaester, and the father decided to heed his son's counsel. And the son proposed that the question of choosing the heir to the throne be entrusted to the lords of Westeros. Apparently, the dragon blood in Vaegon's veins had cooled considerably, and the old king, as Jaehaerys had long been called, was simply too wary of his long reign. The decision of the Great Council, convened in the 101st year after the conquest, undoubtedly became the cause of many calamities. The question of succession was decided between Rhaenys, daughter of Aemon, and Viserys, son of his younger brother. The ossified thinking of the lords of Westeros could not be pierced by anything, neither by the doctrine of exceptionalism, which seemed to have been forgotten, nor by the right of primogeniture. Queen Alysanne had barely managed to abolish the right of the first knight, and here came the unthinkable, a woman upon the Iron Throne. Naturally, the Great Council, almost unanimously, spoke in favor of Viserys. This decision doomed not only the dragons, but who could have known that in the 101st year after the conquest? The final years of Jaehaerys' life were brightened by the daughter of the new Hand, Alicent Hightower. She would yet play her role in history, but for now, she merely read to the old king the book of his loyal supporter, Septon Barth. In the 103rd year after the conquest, King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, called the Conciliator, died at the age of 69. With his death, the Targaryens' road began to roll downhill, though as yet, no one noticed. In principle, King Viserys I Targaryen was not such a bad ruler. His reign can quite rightly be called peaceful. However, his mistakes on the matrimonial front led to a bloody feud within the ancient Valyrian house. But let us proceed in order. King Viserys was married to his cousin, the daughter of Daela Targaryen, and her husband Rodrik Arryn. But he lost his wife before ascending the throne. Yes, diluting dragon blood with unworthy seed did not begin with Viserys I. They say Prince Viserys Targaryen loved his wife, and from this union a daughter, Rhaenyra, was born. She was born while Queen Alysanne was still alive in the 97th year after the conquest. Viserys adored his daughter. After gaining the throne, Viserys I finally awaited the birth of a son, but Queen Aemma died in a grievous childbirth. The heir survived her only briefly. Then, disregarding the decrees of the Great Council of the 101st year, the king named his daughter Rhaenyra as heir. It should be said that, at the time, hardly anyone objected. The princess was loved throughout the realm. In Westeros, the young Rhaenyra was called the Pearl of the Kingdom. The appointment of a daughter as heir gave rise to new family strife. Cousin Rhaenys considered the position rightfully belonging to her son Laenor by Corlys Velaryon, and Viserys also had a younger brother, Daemon. In childhood, the brothers were very close, and so at first, Viserys even declared that they would rule together. Unfortunately, even then, a true nest of vipers was forming at the young king's court, with the Hand, Otto Hightower, at its head, inherited by Viserys from his father. His hostility toward Prince Daemon may have had rational grounds. The younger Targaryen possessed an explosive temper, and despised all proprieties. After the death of the queen and the heir, the enmity between the Hand and the king's brother intensified. It was the Hand who spoke the decisive word in removing Daemon from the succession. Even the fact that the prince had effectively created the City Watch, known to us as the Gold Cloaks, did not help. The king and his younger brother fell out badly. Daemon left the court, and the cunning Hightower rubbed his hands in glee. The outwardly prosperous reign slid smoothly toward the abyss. In the 160th year after the conquest, Viserys married again. Contrary to common sense, his bride was not Laena Velaryon, the daughter of cousin Rhaenys, but Alicent Hightower, the daughter of the crafty Hand. This was precisely the moment when the wrong blood entered the family. In defiance of all Targaryen traditions, Viserys took a wife who had not a drop of Valyrian blood. And, most unpleasantly, this woman bore the king no fewer than 3 sons. However, as later became clear, the Hand had miscalculated. Viserys had no intention of giving the throne to children of impure blood. His heir remained Rhaenyra. Hostility arose between the queen and the princess. The king, who could not abide squabbles, tried to reconcile his women, but failed. Even during Viserys' lifetime, the court and the realm split into 2 hostile camps. The Blacks, supporters of Rhaenyra, and the Greens, devotees of Alicent Hightower and her sons. Even among the dragons, a line of alienation appeared, and the beasts of the Blacks and the Greens hissed and snapped at one another. Perhaps Aegon the Conqueror or some other strong king would have noticed this, but Viserys, with his peaceful nature, seemed to attach little importance to what was happening. Perhaps he should have immediately married Rhaenyra to her unruly uncle, but the latter was bound by an unhappy marriage and had a poor reputation. Thus, Laenor Velaryon, her cousin, was chosen as husband for the heir to the throne, and Daemon, finally freed from his unloved wife, married Laena Velaryon, the very woman his brother had so harshly rejected. It might seem that the kingdom faced only problems of succession. To some extent, under Viserys I, this was indeed the case. Prince Daemon and the Velaryons waged constant wars against pirates on the Stepstones. Otherwise, the realm remained at peace. Today, we would call this a lull before the storm, and we would not be mistaken. But in those days, unfortunately, there was no sufficiently far-sighted person with enough influence at court. And so the quarrels over the throne only gained momentum. The situation worsened because Rhaenyra's children by Laenor Velaryon bore none of the family traits. At a court well aware of the consort's preference for men, rumors of bastardy spread. Their father was thought to be the princess's protector, the former captain of the Gold Cloaks, Sir Harwin Strong. King Viserys, of course, tried to suppress the rumors and even imposed harsh punishment for spreading them. However, one cannot cut out tongues from wives and sons, and vile whispers crawled from within the royal family itself. Rhaenyra's children openly feuded with the children of Queen Alicent, and the king could not quell the strife. In the 120th year after the conquest, Laenor and Laena Velaryon died. The funerals on Dragonstone turned into a brawl between the children of the king and the heir. One of the princes lost an eye and at the same time claimed the mightiest dragon, Vhagar, upon whom Queen Visenya had already conquered Westeros. It should be said that by then, most of the Targaryen offspring had dragons, though most of them were still very young. The princess's presumed lover was removed from court, but the gossip could no longer be stopped. A fire at Harrenhal, where Sir Harwin Strong had been sent, claimed the lives of the unfortunate protector of Rhaenyra and his father. Rhaenyra herself decided to strengthen her position by marrying her uncle Daemon. The marriage took place against her father's will, but it brought the realm two true Targaryens, Aegon and Viserys. Meanwhile, the king restored Otto Hightower as Hand, deepening the family rift still further. In his final years, King Viserys I was often ill. In the 129th year after the conquest, he died in his sleep. 26 years of his rule had been peaceful and prosperous for the realm, yet they turned into dreadful calamities after the sovereign's death. Some even cautiously voiced the opinion that Queen Alicent had personally seen to hastening her husband's end. To be honest, it sounded quite plausible. With this part of the book, Fire and Blood, fans of the world of Ice and Fire are probably most familiar. The civil war that erupted in Westeros after the death of King Viserys I came to be known as the Dance of the Dragons. The events that drenched Westeros in the blood of men and dragons for the span of 2 years have been adapted into a grand television series, and soon we shall see its 3rd season. After the death of King Viserys I, his wife, Queen Alicent, concealed her husband's passing for quite some time. Supporters of the lawful heir within the royal council and among informed servants were hastily imprisoned or put to death. In her messages to the lords, she referred to the Great Council of the 101st year and promised advantageous marriages and offices. The treasury was removed from the capital and divided into several parts. Perhaps the Green faction from the very beginning was unsure it could hold King's Landing. That seemed logical. On Rhaenyra's side there were, for the time being, more dragons, even though the mightiest, Vhagar, had gone to the Greens. By concealing the king's death, Queen Alicent secured herself a head start of 9 days. After that, Dragonstone was finally informed of what had occurred. As a result, 2 coronations took place in Westeros, that of Aegon II in King's Landing, and that of Rhaenyra on Dragonstone. The realm split into 2 hostile camps. After the diplomatic war came a real one, yet the outcome of this conflict was decided not by armies. What is most interesting is that not even dragons proved decisive. The main weapons in the struggle between the true heir Rhaenyra and Aegon II, the usurper, were betrayals, and the final blow was delivered by popular uprisings. The Meisters who named this horrific civil war the Dance of the Dragons were inspired by images of aerial combat. Indeed, for a common Westerosi, even an educated one, battles in the sky seemed more poetic than terrifying. The true tragedy of this war was the death of the mightiest dragons of the ruling house. If only they had fallen in honorable battle. The enormous beasts truly appeared to perform a silent tango, trying to hurl one another from beneath the clouds. Such scenes were fodder for minstrels, sources for ballads and legends. In reality, the history of the last war fought with dragons is far more prosaic. In aerial battles perished Viserys Targaryen, Rhaenys Velaryon, Daemon Targaryen, and Aemond Targaryen. Even the colossal ancient Vhagar, the strongest and most experienced of dragons, did not escape death in battle. In the fury of the skyfights, many dragons and their riders made their final flight, but not all. The Targaryens grievously erred when, ignoring the dragons' need for volcanoes, they built the dragon pit in King's Landing. This man-made cavern became the grave for those beasts who were never raised into the air by the whirlwinds of war. Human hatred and folly destroyed them. At one point, Rhaenyra managed to seize King's Landing. Her attempt to secure herself upon the Iron Throne cost the lives of most of the dragons that still lived. A queen with an empty treasury is not the dream of subjects, and the people's love for the Pearl of Westeros had long since faded. Enduring countless hardships, Rhaenyra, almost like a madwoman, made one foolish mistake after another, provoking a rebellion. A maddened mob burst into the dragon pit. It might seem there is nothing more terrible in the world than dragonfire. Alas, that is not so. A pack of dogs is quite capable of bringing down even the largest and strongest bull. So too, the endless waves of the rabble ultimately managed to destroy the chained dragons, unable to take to the sky. Believing her younger brother Aegon to be either missing or dead, Rhaenyra, to her misfortune, decided to flee the rebellion and go to Dragonstone. There, an extremely unpleasant surprise awaited her. Not only was her brother alive, he had seized her home, slain the few loyal retainers, and lay in wait for his sister. One may think what one wishes, but it is clear that the offspring of Alicent and Viserys bore tainted blood. Without the slightest hesitation, Aegon II fed his captured elder sister to his dragon before the eyes of her son. Not only did he slaughter his kin without restraint, by this dreadful execution, as many later believed, he signed the death warrant of the remaining dragons. The usurper's nephew Aegon, son of Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen, would hate the great beasts for the rest of his life, the creatures that had brought his family power over Westeros. The triumph of the Green faction, however, proved short-lived. Having eliminated the lawful heir, Aegon II took the Iron Throne. Yet he did not become a king in truth. Yes, his supporters purged the capital of rebels, but the elder son of Viserys, crippled by battle and weak of character, was a worthless ruler. In his stead, the council governed. Both the book Fire and Blood and the magnificently produced series recount the Dance of the Dragons in detail. What interests us, however, is something else entirely. As in A Song of Ice and Fire, all the great quarrels over the Iron Throne began with the light hand of crafty counselors, and by them they also ended. In our tale, the fate of the Targaryen dynasty was decided by the Master of Whisperers, Sir Larys Strong. Just as he once, at the outset of the struggle for succession, took the side of Aegon II, so too did he later facilitate the downfall of the worthless king, by the age-old method of spies and traitors. Poison. It is said that Queen Alicent poisoned her feeble husband, but that is no more than conjecture. Larys Strong's involvement in the death of her son, however, is an indisputable fact. Thus, through Fire and Blood, the dream of Daemon Targaryen was finally fulfilled. The Iron Throne ultimately passed to his elder son by his niece, Rhaenyra. Westeros received its third king, Aegon, the Dragonbane. The new Aegon, like the Conqueror's grandson Jaehaerys, received the throne and a devastated realm before reaching adulthood. In such cases, a kingdom is ruled by a regent, but the situation proved such that no single person could suffice. As a result, power over Westeros passed into the hands of a regency council, assembled to appease all the warring factions and bring the civil war to an end. Yes, the dragons were gone, but the lords and their lands remained, and they still had to be pacified or subdued. The young king Aegon III was married to Jaehaera, the only surviving daughter of Aegon II and his own sister, Helena. In this way, the Regency Council sought to put an end to the existence of the Black and Green parties, which, on the whole, succeeded. Gradually, however, power in the realm was seized by one of the members of the Regency Council, Unwin Peake. The death of Queen Jaehaera looks somewhat strange. Moreover, many at the time inclined to believe that Peake had a hand in it, dreaming of marrying the king to his own daughter. After all, Otto Hightower had managed something similar. The realm was saved from yet another queen without a drop of Valyrian blood by chance. Unwin Peake was forced to agree with the council's proposal. The king must choose his bride himself. Peake, of course, expected that Aegon, who showed little interest in maidens, would grow accustomed to Miriel Peake and choose her. In the 133rd year after the conquest, grand bride showings were held. Some even called them, behind closed doors, a cattle fair. Girls passed in an endless procession before the Iron Throne, and Unwin Peake already believed his scheme assured. However, the splendid plan of the power-hungry hand was completely undone by Aelin Velaryon. The Lord of Driftmark brought his ward, Daenerys Velaryon, daughter of the fallen Sir Daeron Velaryon. The girl possessed classical Valyrian features and extraordinary beauty. The king fell in love at first sight and declared Daenerys his bride. Aelin Velaryon not only provided the king with a bride bearing a substantial share of Valyrian blood, he also managed to ransom from Lys the king's younger brother Viserys, thus resolving the question of an heir. Unfortunately, Prince Viserys had spent too long in luxurious captivity across the Narrow Sea. His marriage to a Lysine woman and the dominance of her banker relatives nearly led to a coup. Fortunately, yet another usurpation was averted, and Unwin Peake finally lost his hold over the realm and the king. These events were dubbed by the people the Lysine Spring, and they took place in the 135th year after the conquest. The following year, the king convened a great council to choose new regents. It is not entirely clear why this was necessary, for by that time Aegon III had nearly reached adulthood. In any case, the elected lords understood little of governance and scarcely interfered with it. On the day he came of age, the king dismissed the regents and refused the traditional royal progress through the realm. From that moment began the reign of Aegon III, known among the people as the Dragonbane. At this sorrowful moment for the Valyrian house and its dragons, the history created by George Martin comes to an end, for now. Everything that follows consists of fragments, hints, and outlines for future books, carefully gathered and systematized by fans of A Song of Ice and Fire. No one can vouch fully for their accuracy because the author has yet to speak his final word. A broken king, a sorrowful kingdom, Aegon III ruled for 20 years. By his wife Daenerys, he had 2 sons and 3 daughters. During his reign, the last she-dragon died a strange death, said by witnesses to have grown no larger than a cat. Malicious tongues claimed that the king, harboring fear and hatred toward dragons, personally poisoned the unfortunate creature. For this deed he received his epithet. Neither the people nor the lords ever came to love the new king. Then the ruler came to understand that dragons were not only dangerous monsters, but also an instrument of power. He summoned mages from across the Narrow Sea, seeking to revive the remaining dragon eggs, but achieved no success. In the final years of his life, Aegon III named his brother Viserys as Hand. In the 157th year after the conquest, the Broken King died of consumption, never realizing that one of the despised beasts had saved his life at the cost of its own. With the death of the last she-dragon, magic began little by little to leave Westeros. Summer grew shorter, and winter became longer and harsher. Aegon the Dragonbane was succeeded by his elder son, Daeron the Young Dragon. This king received the throne at 14 years of age and ruled for only 4 years. A reckless military adventure, the conquest of Dorne cut short the young ruler's life, along with the lives of many lords and soldiers. Naturally, a sovereign inclined to senseless risk did not live long enough to produce heirs. The next king was the younger brother of the young dragon Baelor, known as the Blessed. This king believed in the Seven with such fervor that it bordered on madness. Nevertheless, it must be acknowledged that the reconciliation with Dorne was his achievement. Where swords and dragons had failed, the Septon King succeeded. The marriage of his grandnephew to Princess Maria Martell put an end to the bloody Dornish wars. Baelor the Blessed also left no offspring, and the throne passed to his uncle and hand, Viserys II, brother of the Dragonbane. The male line heirs of Aegon III failed to leave descendants. The daughters, however, distinguished themselves. One of them, Daena the Defiant, managed to give birth to Daemon Blackfyre. Through her efforts, the ancient Valyrian house once again acquired two warring branches and militant claimants to the Iron Throne. Viserys II, strangely enough, proved to be as good a king as he had been a hand. Had he granted more time, he might have won for himself the glory of his famed ancestor Jaehaerys the Conciliator. Alas, the king, who had survived the Dance of the Dragons, Lycian captivity, a brother, and two nephews died less than a year after his succession. Some say that the sudden death of the sovereign was the work of his heir Aegon. And so Aegon IV ascended the throne. He received the epithet, the Unworthy. This nickname fully reflected his nature, for he was a worthless ruler. Having sired a multitude of bastards, King Aegon IV had only two legitimate children. The Targaryen dynasty was fortunate indeed that his son Daeron lived to ascend the throne. Yet, before his death, the unworthy king presented the lawful heir with a thoroughly vile surprise by legitimizing all his bastards. And to one of them, the son of Daena the Defiant, Daemon Blackfyre, he even contrived to give the ancient Valyrian sword Blackfyre. It is little wonder that Daemon Blackfyre, having received the Conqueror's sword, grew only more convinced of his right to the Iron Throne. The next Targaryen king was Daeron the Good. His queen, Maria Martell, bore him 4 sons. His sisters, Daenerys, married to Marin Martell, the younger brother of the queen, brought the 7 kingdoms all of Dorne. The Dornish prince at last bent the knee. Of course, turmoil followed. The Blackfyre rebellion badly shook the realm and the king's nerves. Here, another bastard of the unworthy, Brynden Rivers, came to the aid of his half-brother. The eldest son of Daeron the Good, Baelor, was killed at a tourney, accidentally slain by his younger brother. We can read this tale in the novella The Hedge Knight, and soon we shall see it on screen in the series The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. After the death of Daeron the Good, the Iron Throne passed to his second son, Aerys, called the Bookish. The king had no desire to rule the realm. Mysticism fascinated him. Obsessed with a dream of reviving dragons, the king buried himself in books, forgetting the kingdom. His hand was Brynden Rivers, regarded by the people as a black sorcerer. Perhaps he was. Yet, without him, various uprisings and 2 Blackfyre rebellions would have torn the country apart. The Bookish king had no heirs of his own, and the Targaryen family was severely thinned by an epidemic, as a result of which Aerys I came to the Iron Throne. After the deaths of his elder nephews, the Bookish king was succeeded by his younger brother, Maegor. Maegor, the first Targaryen, was a warrior king who spent the 12 years of his reign chiefly suppressing rebellions. In one of these wars, he was killed. After his death, the Great Council had to be convened once again to prevent a new civil war. The throne was granted to Maegor's 4th son, Aegon. Aegon V, called the Unlikely, spent his childhood and youth traveling the country incognito, cleverly hiring himself out as a squire to a simple hedge knight. As king, Aegon V discovered that he had been born before his time. His reforms, aimed at improving the lives of the small folk, found no understanding among the nobility. This, of course, was to be expected. During the reign of the Unlikely, there was yet another Blackfyre rebellion and numerous revolts by discontented lords. Aegon V's desire to abandon the tradition of incestuous marriages could not be realized in practice. Moreover, his willful sons severely damaged relations between the ruling dynasty and the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms. The king died in a fire at Summerhall, when, during the celebration of the birth of his grandson Rhaegar, yet another attempt was made to restore the dragons. Along with him perished many of his companions, as well as his eldest son and daughter-in-law. The throne was taken by Jaehaerys II, married to his sister Shaera. Jaehaerys was a wise king, but a tendency toward illness quickly cut short his reign. The next and last Targaryen was Aerys the Mad. The fire at Summerhall claimed not only the lives of many relatives, but also the king's sanity. All his life, Aerys II had a strange bond with fire, and although at the beginning of his reign it seemed that the Iron Throne had found a good master, hopes were not fulfilled. The last Targaryen turned into a mad tyrant, fiercely hated by the entire realm. The king committed such deeds that even his death at the hands of his own Kingsguard knight did not seem unexpected. Aerys the Mad and his sister wife, Rhaella, brought several children into the world. The youngest, Viserys and Daenerys, managed to survive the overthrow of the dynasty. Among the people and the lords, there were rumors that the eldest son, Rhaegar, might have become a good king, had not a ruinous passion for Lyanna Stark led him, and with him, all the Targaryens to the grave. In the cycle, A Song of Ice and Fire, we see many hints that the surviving descendants of the Dragon Lords may yet return to the Iron Throne created by Aegon the Conqueror for his heirs. Even the prophecy of the rebirth of dragons has, after all, come true. So, will the Valyrian dynasty return to rule Westeros? And magic, will the world feel it once more? We can only wait to see how the author weaves together all the threads of this long tale, and how the grand epic will end. And that is all from me. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to rate it, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell. Your activity is the greatest reward for me. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Goodbye.